Can everyone hear me? Can I have some nods if you can hear me? That's a good start. You can see me as well. I thought I'd start by letting you see me before I put up some PowerPoint slides and showing you what we're going to do. Just to let you know that this is obviously a course that's been pulled together to be quite responsive to the current situation. And as a lot of you know, it's a rapidly changing environment. Also fully aware that we've got a real range of museum professionals on the call today. You've all got your own areas of expertise. We've attempted to design a course that will cover off a lot of your questions about reopening and planning for reopening. And I'm going to take you on a journey and look through some international case studies and look at what the trends are globally. So some of you may have seen on Twitter, I've been collating global tracking information about museum reopening and posting that every week. So we're looking at what some of those trends are, and then taking the opportunity to see how those trends and those solutions could be applied in a UK setting. We're going to start to go into more detail. So we're going to look very much at individual areas of operation. These are the ones we've selected around visitor social distancing, staff welfare and protection, cleaning regimes, cafes, shops, toilets and lifts. So we're going to go into some very kind of key areas. So what will visitors find reassuring? The hand sanitizer entrance is the most important thing according to this survey. So I think, again, and what I'd read for all of these are they're very visible things. They're reassurance to visitors that something's on site. Libby may have something to say on this as well, because we think about the alcohol content of these, and I'm also thinking alcohol content, historic fabric collections. There's a really interesting piece in that, and just the chemicals that are in some of these hand cleaning gels. Staff visibly cleaning surfaces, as I talked about yesterday, is the visible. We normally want cleaners to be quite invisible. Is actually having your cleaners or cleaning taking place being really visible a real reassurance to your visitors. Having somebody cleaning door handles on the main entrance if it has to be touched, if you haven't got touch points, is that really going to help your visitors feel really more comfortable in the space? Because ultimately, if they become comfortable and feel that the building is clean, they will relax and enjoy the experience. If they don't, they'll be concerned the whole time about how clean it is, and they won't enjoy the experience in the same way. So visibility there, and notices on site reassuring visitors about cleaning. So that's quite an interesting way that question's been positioned, but they're actually saying notices about reassuring them. So that's to say not about them just being clean, but also saying that cleaning is taking place. So we'll talk about the toilets. So maybe even just publicising the frequency of the cleaning and that you have enhanced that regime might be quite reassuring to a lot of people. So cleanliness is really important. So these are just some of the areas to think about around cleaning. Clean for reopening. So this is some really high level guidance that's in there. So ventilation systems, sorry, this is a slight aside for the more facilities management types amongst you, is there is a lot of guidance out there saying increasing fresh air flow, because outside air is, in theory, it reduces the risk of contamination. For some of you, that may mean opening the windows. For some of you, maybe adjusting your ventilation systems. Think about this: the more fresh air you bring into the building, particularly if you have a mechanical ventilation system, will increase your energy costs. Also, potentially bringing pollutants. So I'm not going to go into Libby's bit too much, but think about the collection care impacts as well of maintaining conditions within your spaces and your historic fabric. Keep cleaning workplaces. This is kind of really obvious stuff that goes in there. Hand sanitizer in multiple locations. Using signs and posters. So do you know what, with the cleaning, an awful lot of the contamination risk is actually from the visitors themselves. So encouraging that good behaviour, limiting touch points. If you have the opportunity and the budget, looking for areas where touch points can be removed. So automatic door openers, where you currently have a manual door opener. Think about toilets. So again, if there's opportunities to have sensor technology put in place in different areas. So all these areas, and I think somebody put the example up earlier around foot operated interactives, something else to think about, reducing those contact points. So the way that, although cleaning is going to be really important, is you need to think about how you can reduce the need for cleaning in the first place, and have that's almost your kind of secondary control. And also as well, think about that as part of your management process. If there are known issues or suspected known issues, is around making sure that you have deep clean processes that can be enacted fairly quickly, and you have companies available to do that. So I didn't have the chat function open, so if anyone else is saying this, Yeah, sorry, the pitch there, Tish, about the CIBC guidance. Yeah, some really good information. If you want some really good information around building control systems, even if you have a maintenance provider, reading that might put you in quite a good position to challenge them. By the way, I would just, I spend a lot of time working on facilities management. There's a lot of companies selling a lot of technology at the moment to help with this. Make sure I'd go to places like CIBC, get the guidance from the source before necessarily investing heavily in technology, when ultimately most of the maintenance providers are saying it's going to be human behaviour that has the biggest impact on doing this. If nothing else, and I can say this, I'm going to wave in the flag around facilities management. Love your cleaners. Don't really appreciate your cleaners at this point. They're the ones who are really visible. You're going to be really reliant on them. I think we should love our cleaners at the best of times. I think they're incredibly underrated in many of our institutions. They're going to be really important to reassuring your staff and visitors. Also remember that potentially your cleaners are the members of staff you're putting at the highest risk. They're the ones who are, in theory, most likely to come into contact with those contaminated areas. When we talk about PPE, staff protection, think about your cleaners primarily. If you have outsourced cleaning, work with those outsourced cleaning providers, understand their processes and protocols. Don't just assume because they're a big company that they're looking after their staff. There's no reason you can't intervene and make sure that all of your outsourced and in-house staff are managed in the same way. So really think around that. And then obviously some really kind of practical advice here, just making sure you're emptying waste facilities potentially more often. So remember that particularly discarded PPE and any other items could be a source of contamination. That waste needs to be managed in a different way. Again, if you've got a waste contractor or working with the local council, you might want to talk to them and set clear use and cleaning guides for toilet facilities. So toilets are potentially the place, the room in your building where there's the most physical contact with different surfaces in various different ways and bodily fluids and all this other kind of things. Then you really need to think about the cleanliness and the management of toilet facilities in particular. And as came up in the previous examples of the data we looked at yesterday, toilets are one of the areas that a lot of visitors are really concerned about. And equally, toilets are a facility that many of your visitors may not have the option to not use, and they will have to use them. So really do think about that. So there's Melissa's just come up with a very interesting question. I'll be interested to get some feedback in the comments here saying there's been a lot of talk about getting staff to do more cleaning and making savings. So potentially using your front of house staff to undertake cleaning. Yeah, I'd like to get your comments on that when I think about that. And obviously, if you're looking to get your staff to undertake any additional tasks, make sure they're trained, developed, that you're working with them, that they're collaborating with you. It's not necessarily just as easy as going, oh, you're here monitoring this gallery, here's a cleaning cloth, can you go and clean this? You've got all the health and safety implications that your cleaners will be trained and fully aware of that other staff might not be. So yeah, any comments to Melissa, I think would be quite interesting to get back on there. So sorry, that was cleaning in a nutshell. Apologies because we're really time stretched. If you've got any specific questions about cleaning, there's some quite good guidance out there. Ultimately, the cleaning guidance you're going to get for your site is going to be very similar to the cleaning guidance for any other kind of setting. So there's some really good guidance out there. So don't just look for guidance on museum cleaning, just cleaning generally. And again, if you have an outsourced cleaning contractor, big or small, make sure you're working with them and understanding their policies and processes as well. So cafes and shops, again, another one we're just going to try and do as much justice to we can in a relatively short period of time. Worth pulling up this data. This was from our UK reopening tracker. We're actually doing a lot of work because there's a lot of sites opening up at the moment. But I thought what's really interesting to see is most of these are places like Kew, National Trust properties, Royal Horticultural Society properties. Most of them have their cafes closed at the moment. So they're indoor facilities. Some of them are offering takeaway. So we're trying to figure out at the moment whether this is them just being very cautious about reopening. I think a lot of them are very mindful of kind of getting negative publicity, and they're looking to develop solutions. I know National Trust is looking to develop some of these on a number of their sites. But what you're seeing on first reopening is a lot of the cafes aren't open. And we're just trying to figure out why that is, whether it's just a kind of, whether they think it's not actually feasible to open these in a safe way, or whether also there is currently government guidance as well around kind of social distancing, and they're following the guidance for other restaurants and catering facilities at the moment. So you can't necessarily be seated next to each other, but we're just seeing how these are kind of opening up in slightly different ways. And also around shops at the moment. So we're not seeing shops reopening. Although I did see an interesting post today, and I'd be interested to know if anyone here has seen the guidance that for non-essential retail, according to an ITV news article, it did mention that museum shops would count as non-essential retail and could potentially reopen earlier from the 15th. If anyone knows where that source, I did try to find the government source of that quote. I haven't. It was on the ITV, on an ITV news article saying that museum shops could open. It may depend also on the location of the shop, whether it has external access or not. It's something worth thinking about. As I mentioned yesterday, some sites have, with external cafes, museums had opened up those for takeaways, so they're getting some of the revenue generation happening before their main site reopens. So cafes, again, risk assessment. So I'm going to say that word not too many more times today because you don't have to listen to me for too much longer. So this is advice and guidance that's taken from the Food Standards Agency. Why I'm putting this up, because those of you who are operating cafes and food outlets will understand these intently anyway. But what I think is really interesting to say, this is their guidance that specifically relates to COVID-19. And if I was to summarize this, it's effectively saying, if you've got good measures in place, you need to carry on doing the good stuff that you're doing already. The coronavirus shouldn't significantly change how you operate, that you need to be maintaining clean spaces already. Social distancing is obviously the big physical change within the space. And we're seeing cafes and restaurants that are opening up elsewhere in the world and physically maintaining those. I saw a really interesting example from, I think it was a museum, it was in Europe, and it was a theme museum, and they actually had mannequins dressed on the empty seats to try and make it not feel like it was too empty. And I've seen others with kind of inflatable dolls and various other things just to kind of make the space feel less dense. Quite interesting in innovative ways, and I think maybe an opportunity to be a bit more playful with the restrictions and think about operating sites in slightly different ways. But fundamentally, when it comes down to the actual kind of food offer and food safety, they're saying, carry on what you're doing. You should have a food safety management system in place. A lot of this should be covered by that already. So again, echoing a lot of what's coming from a lot of other government and non-government bodies, is they're saying the current situation does not change the requirements around PPE. So they're saying that there are some PPE requirements when it comes to food preparation, but they don't see that there being specific requirements coming in. So a lot of that, if you choose to implement them, may come down to local choice and your local risk assessment. So please correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm happy for people to jump in on the chat to say this, that particularly when it comes to food preparation around coronavirus, there isn't specific guidance that says you have to wear PPE. There may be some sites that are recommending it, but do think about this as you go through your planning. And again, with gloves, this is where the quote I was mentioning about earlier. And they're saying the best way in which food handlers can maintain good personal hygiene is by frequently washing their hands. Gloves can be used as an aid to good food hygiene practice, but should not be considered a substitute for a thorough regime of effective hand washing. That can be applied everywhere. And I think it's a really important thing that we feel like we want to respond and put measures in place, and wearing gloves feels like a very physical thing we can do and something that's quite visible. When you look at the guidance saying actually, it's not, it could actually even be a hindrance in some scenarios. So do think about this, and as with all of the solutions you put into place, there's going to be a matrix of solutions that are going to work in different areas. So the advice we were given 4 months ago about washing your hands still stands, and it still probably still continues to be one of the most important pieces of advice when it comes to cafe operations or anything elsewhere. Again, sorry, this is the similar points around PPE and just saying that shouldn't change the issues. Again, around face masks, protecting high-risk foods. So this is all guidance that's pretty much would be within for all these original bullet points. Again, the last one here was saying about social distancing, and this is particularly, I think, around staff and the preparation of food. It will not always be possible to keep a distance of 2 meters. In these circumstances, both employers and employees must do everything reasonably they can do to reduce the risk. And again, it says, and there's something, I'll give you the proper link to this after the session in the final slide pack. And there's a lot of guidance out there. So think about your food preparation, what they're saying here in terms of the food preparation element. That shouldn't significantly change. A number of you may be working with external catering providers. Again, I'd encourage you to work with them, understand what their plannings are. However, stepping back from this and that visitor perception piece, even though your catering staff on the counter may not need to wear protection, that might give reassurance to your visitors. It might have an impact on sales if people feel that they're either the relevant PPE isn't in place or is in place. Something to think about. And maybe this is an opportunity for engagement and something you may have to be fairly fluid about. And so a lot of the work you're going to be doing is engaging with your visitors, thinking about what they want, and then responding to those as you go through. So similarly with shops, this is the same slide again. Shops have been generally closed on most sites, following broader guidance, but particularly as I think we see the change in the wider sector from the 15th, that non-essential shops can open. You may see more shops on sites reopening. Keep an eye on those sites that are open, places like Kew, Wisley, see how they open up. We expect that they'll be following some of the core guidance around retail, managing retail spaces. So I'm not going to go through that whole long list I went through yesterday. You can go back to the slides if you want, but I thought these 4 were probably the most important ones. If you're looking to reopen your shop, define a number of customers that can reasonably follow 2 metre social distancing. The same with all of your spaces. There's a consistency of approach here. And that goes to outdoor selling areas as well as indoor selling areas. Limit the number of customers inside the shop to kind of think about how you can manage that. It depends on the size and the layout of your facility about how easily that's managed. It may just be that your shop is part of a larger space that's used for other purposes as well. So it may just be a management plan for all of those. Encourage customers to use hand sanitizer or hand washing facilities as they enter the premises to reduce the risk of transmission. Again, if you've got a shop, people want to pick up the products, they want to browse. The best way to prevent contamination is to have them wash their hands, maybe even providing hand sanitation at the location to encourage them to actively do this. Cleaning regimes to go around and clean all of your products on a regular basis is going to be quite a difficult thing to do. I think you really need to think about this. I'm already now thinking of many museum shops, particularly around for the children's toys, and you have large buckets of toys that regularly get handled. How you think about that? The best way to prevent it is to have anyone have clean hands before they do this, or not have them on pads. But equally think about that experience for particularly young people in these spaces. Imagine a scenario that you're being told you can't touch, they're living with this. Your shops, your cafes, your toilets, they're all part of the visitor experience. Think about your consistency of approach as we go through. So someone just on the chat as well, pick up a few of these. People are suggesting additional bins throughout the site. It's probably, we talk about managing the risk of waste. So although you may choose from an aesthetic point of view not to have too many bins, maybe there's a period of time you are putting more bins to avoid, particularly front of house staff or anybody else, having to pick up rubbish as well. So that's quite a useful one. Someone saying they've heard some London museum shops are opening. So again, from that advice I heard, from the 15th, I believe the museum shops can open. But I don't know of any actual case studies. If you watch my social media feeds, I'll be sharing any of those as and when I hear them. So that was shops. Sorry, a real quick rattle through. Again, with the shops, primarily a lot of the broader rules apply, and I definitely encourage you to look at some really detailed retail guidance that is out there around these. Focus points, toilets and lifts. So there's an awful lot we can say about this. There's an awful lot we can not say about this. So fundamentally, this is where I do feel like a scratch record at the moment, is it's about cleaning, regular cleaning. A lot of it's about reassuring your visitors, but I would say real focus on the toilets, that they're normally the facility we don't think about, but this is the potential, the areas in the museum I think have got the highest risk of contamination, cross-contamination between individuals. So really think about enhanced cleaning regimes. So, and there's 2 benefits to doing this. One is the cleaning regime to actually reduce the risk, make it visible. So one is about having the cleaners not be afraid to be visible. The other way we talked about earlier, was mentioned by actually in the visitor survey, about having signage up, about reassuring your visitors that there is regular cleaning. So some sites, I think it's, I may come to this one shortly, I think Kew Gardens are actually managing visitors in and out of the toilets. I think Museum of London yesterday also referenced, his suggestion was that all of their toilets become unisex because they'd be, a member of staff would be managing someone in and out of the toilet. So they're expecting a very labour-intensive management strategy for their toilets. And I think this is going to be quite a difficult thing to manage. On many sites, we probably don't have enough toilet provision already. There are an awful lot of users, people with particular needs, those with young children. There's a whole plethora of reasons why people may need to use toilet facilities, and equally may not be able to queue for them and may not be able to spend time. This is probably one of your key conflict areas around front of house, and equally your visitors with each other is the toilets. I think they're going to be a real hot spot, a pressure point where all of these measures kind of come together at a point when people are going to be desperate to use the facilities. They're going to find it really difficult, and I think you should really think about them. So a couple of case studies here, just flagging up, just some from social media. So again, another one from Kew. Again, they're putting it clearly on their website. This is about reassuring visitors before they come to site. but equally they're pointing out where certain toilets aren't open. So some visitors need to know what toilet provision you have open. They won't be able to visit site. And it's a very interesting one, even with Q, that they're saying that not all of their toilets are open. So some people need to be within a certain distance of a toilet at a certain time. You are restricting their access to explore your site. So there's something that you really need to think about. I mean, toilets are always an issue at the best times, but I think they're going to be a real pinch point here. You may need to wait a while we make sure there's enough space between each person. So again, an implication here, I think Q are doing is that they're physically managing kind of queues. We have soap and towel dispensers. Worth bringing hand sanitizer with you too. So this is about encouraging visitors to do this. So this is where Q are really trialing this out. We're hoping, by the way, the toilet session next week to kind of get some operational feedback from some of these sites. Again, Hornham Museum and Gardens is actually in their gardens, they're not actually in the museum, but they're just kind of advising people that only one personal family group is allowed at a time. So again, understanding that people may be going in groups, particularly if you've got children or if you have certain needs and you've got a carer, people may need to go into toilet facilities together. A really interesting one, I didn't pull up a museum example. I actually almost didn't want to call anybody out on this one, but some museums not opening their toilets. And this is one of the strategies that people are thinking about. Particularly if you have a small site, you may only have a single toilet or a very, very small number of toilets, and you may not have the staff available. You may not have a full-time cleaner available to clean them on a regular basis, and you may not be able to afford to have one. Some people may consider closing their toilets. You need to really think clearly about the messaging. If you're going to do that, make sure you've got clear messaging on your website and so people know before they come onto the site. You need to let them clearly know where the alternatives are. You've also got to think about, well, if they aren't on your site, and you've got time visit slots, you may have people coming and going off site. They may want to leave site to go to the toilet and then come back up on again. It's a real tricky area. Some museums in France have actually, particularly small museums and house museums, and so their toilets will not be available because they can't manage the cleaning. This is going to be a real difficult area, and it may be one of the pinch points that means some institutions can't reopen. And I think it's a real, an interesting one to watch. So there'll be a big debate about this next week. So just to look at the feed, there's one going to Tish and say, have been thinking to open only open toilets that are in line of sight at the front of the toilet queues so visitors can see when a toilet is available, occupied. Yeah. Placing signage, I think, again, encouraging good behaviour. A number of European institutions that I heard speak on the Alva webinar when I asked this question pretty much said they're putting up signage, they're encouraging visitors to do the right thing, but they're not managing it. So there are case studies out there for that. So this one here is from Mark Ellis, the National Arboretum. Again, so this is very practical approach to social distancing in a urinal setting. So they've actually taped off a number of the urinals, so they've limited, there's only 2 urinals available and they're 2 meters apart. One thing I'd say with this is, I'm sure this is very practical, some of these solutions may need to be sustainable for quite a period of time. So you may need to think about, what does this look like in a few months' time? Also, toilets are part of the visitor experience. What does this say about the visitor experience? But also, acknowledging that anything more than this would probably be quite costly to implement. So is this actually quite a practical way to do this? I think if you've got any concerns and you're feeling like you're having to kind of make these measures that aren't ideal and aren't as polished as you'd like, signage, feel free to engage with customers. This is a known situation that we're all dealing with. Make sure you're engaging with people, making them aware. I mean, so Mark and National Arboretum, this is published on Twitter. They're kind of going out there and saying that this is what it's going to be like. This is setting some expectation for your visitors before they come to site around what it is. So another one here. So this is actually from a school setting. So look at the bottom. And this is just around hand washing and just, again, encouraging good behaviour whilst also maintaining 2 meter social distancing. So you'll notice from this one, they've taped off the middle sink. There's floor markings in part. They've even put a bin in the middle there. There's signage in place. They've taken the hand dryers out of use. So hand dryers versus paper towels is quite an interesting discussion that's going on. There seems to be a bit more of a preference for paper towels, because in theory you're just contaminating the paper towel and going in the bin. If you're using a hand sanitizer, if your hands are still contaminated, you're in theory spreading water vapor around. There's not much data on that, but it's one thing that's being looked at. Even historically, I know there's been some research that's been done around the drop-in hand dryers. I won't mention the brand, but you drop your hands in, and they're actually a high source of contamination at the best of times, even before this, because the water droplets collect in the bottom, and they're actually quite a source of contaminant buildup. So something to think about as well. So again, while we're putting some of these case studies up, you may have to think of some very practical solutions to this. And they may be quite kind of matter of fact as you go through signage. This is one from the World Health Organization. There's plenty of examples out there. Again, consistency of signage, ones that make it really clear. There's plenty out there. I think Public Health England have a lot on their websites as well. So clear signage as we're coming through. My voice is getting quicker because I know I can kind of feel Libby looking at me going, you've got 15 minutes, Ben, to get through the next two topics. So I will do this. Just one slide on this. Lifts, really think about this. Ultimately, one of the large constraints we have, particularly in the UK, is the 2 metre social distancing. In most lifts, you cannot maintain 2 metres social distancing. So your lifts are for one person or one family group at a time. So you need to think about the measuring around this. Where possible, it's the encouragement to use alternative routes if they are available, for example, stairs, rather than prohibiting people. Again, you're producing another area for conflict if you're saying only certain types of visitors can go on. One thing I'd mention with toilets and with lifts as well, that you may make them available to people and say only people with certain accessibility needs need them. Not all disabilities are visible. So how is that managed? How is that policed? Is that a conflict situation? Again, you all understand your visitors better. Engage with your front of house staff. Think around this. Maybe you haven't all got lifts. But again, they're another point where touch points in place. A good, very low-cost scenario, a solution I saw, particularly for staff moving around buildings, was a large company giving out small stylus pens, plastics that got attached to lanyards. So as a minimum, staff didn't have to touch the buttons with their fingers. It was just a really kind of simple, small piece of plastic that cost pence attached to their lanyard. And it reduced, say, if they had to go and lift on a frequent basis or any kind of buttons where they're using to get access, it's about limiting those contact points and just making those small changes. So consider alternative routes. Again, regular cleaning of those points. Ultimately, you're not going to be able to maintain social distancing, so discourage people from using them where possible, or encourage them to use alternative routes. Okay, I like this quote. There's no fast track back to normal. Rather than making a return to normal our goal, we must learn from this crisis in order to effectively respond, mitigate, adapt, and integrate. So we're not going to get out of this one quickly. We're responding. We're thinking about what we're doing, and just kind of really be thoughtful around your planning. We're going to move on to the last topic now. I've got 10 minutes. I'm confident I can get through this. So first of all, communication. Your first thought should be around communicating with your staff. Just picked up a few things here. Listen to your staff. Listen, see what, rather than coming in and making plans about what you need to do about your staff, first of all, think about their concerns and use that as your starting point. It's a really good opportunity to engage, particularly in the planning process. Remember that you might not know your own staff's specific situations. So you don't know, you treat them as one kind of one set group of individuals with the same needs. They may have personal needs. They may be shielding other members in their own household. They may have a whole number of other issues that are going on. They may have been severely impacted themselves personally, maybe even with bereavement during lockdown. Think about those considerations as you go through. So take the opportunity to engage with them and listen, first of all, and dedicate time and space for thinking about your teams working together, and also giving them the opportunity to engage and support each other as well. So communicating with your staff, number one. And where possible, even if they're furloughed, just that kind of regular contact point. And if staff come out, and also with staff who are returning to the buildings, engage with them and communicate with them how their experience as members of staff will be different before they come back. Set their expectations. Don't wait for them to come into the building and then expect them to change, because they would have already walked through spaces and touched door handles and used the toilets but before you even get to have a staff meeting with them. So engage with them before they come back onto site. Again, share some high-level advice around from the Mental Health Foundation, but I think it's quite useful when it's talking about communicating with the staff. Share reputable sources of information. So don't be tempted to be tempted to too many Facebook articles or Twitter articles about a doctor in Italy who said this, and try and keep it as consistent as possible and in line with central government guidance. But be prepared to respond to questions that they may have. And you can see the list here. Talk to your people. Everyone has mental health issues. Remember, vulnerability has many faces. Be compassionate, be considerate during this process, and promote access to support as well. So we've mentioned some of those links earlier. Send those around. It's not just around you engaging with them, it's also giving them the opportunity to engage with other people elsewhere as well. So think about the anxieties and concerns of your visitors as they come through. Fundamentally, their big concerns are going to be around cafes, toilets, interactions going down. So think about where those concerns lie, and think this could almost be your guide for a communication strategy with your visitors before they come onto site, focusing on the key areas that you think they're going to do, or engaging with them. And we'll talk about this. A number of institutions have gone out. National Museums, Liverpool have gone out with a poll. Like I mentioned yesterday, I think Museum of London have also done with one. Go and do the poll. They're engaging with their visitors. They're using opportunities to say, well, if it looks like this, how would you feel about this? What are your main concerns as a visitor? And there's a twofold. You get some great information about your visitors before they even come back to site. And it's also warming your visitors up that you're preparing. It's kind of keeping you in their minds. It's getting them ready to come back to site and getting them ready to come back in a way that is going to help you and support you as you go through. So really think about this. There's a great example, say National Museum Liverpool and Museum of London as a starting point, but there are others out there using tools like SurveyMonkey, which for certain surveys can be free, and you don't necessarily need to spend money on this. So if anybody knows any other good ones, feel free to kind of put those in the chat link. Government advice. So non-essential retail business available to open for next Monday. There's this is provided on from the government website around kind of putting these statements up, and effectively these are more around your workers, but you might want to consider something similar with your visitors, and saying that putting them in prominent places, and about reassuring people that you have taken steps. This is a kind of a declaration. So you may want to think about this format, which is available to download from the government website, or your own version of this. It very clearly states just those key messages, those key issues that people will make them feel more comfortable. And like I said, remember, you've got to reassure your staff as much as reassure your visitors. Again, I just wanted to bring this up because a couple of people mentioned it yesterday, and I mentioned it around this kite mark accreditation standard. So this is an extract from one of the useful ALVA communications. They are working on it, ALVA Visit England, and effectively there's going to be a scheme that is going to be launched after the 13th, so very soon, kind of end of this week, and it'll be an accreditation scheme you can sign up to, and then you can publish that on your, it's going to be, they're not calling it a kite mark, but it's a kite mark inverted commas that you can put on your website, social media, on site. And again, it's reassuring people that you've undertaken certain steps and consistent steps. And again, this is something that's going to be used across an awful lot of visitor attractions. So it could be quite a quick and easy way for people to get reassurance about coming back to your site. So there's more information coming out via ALVA. Again, I'll try and push this out through my social media feeds as we go through this as well. I'm going to jump out of this now, and as we come in towards the end, there's just a very quick video I just want to show you, and it's just a 2-minute video from that Swiss Transport Museum that I mentioned before. And I'm just going to try and get this up and running, and then hopefully you can see this, and let's hope the technology doesn't work and I don't have another power cut midway through this one. So hopefully you will all be able to see this. I'll go to full screen. So it's only a 1 minute 20-second video, but I just like what I like about this is the clear messaging. Equally, this is a museum in Switzerland, but I think they've done it in such a way that it's clearly understandable by any visitor. So just have a look at this as we just give you a bit of food for thought. So I thought that was just an interesting one to share. What I really liked about that was just really simple, clear messaging that got the key points across. And if you're a visitor to that site, if I've watched that, I feel a lot more confident and comfortable about visiting that site. Just I've got an understanding. I've even walked through the entrance. I've got a feeling about what that's going to look like and what my experience is going to be like. So I think that's I just quite like that one. I thought it was quite clean. There's a lot of examples out there at the moment of different opportunities. So we just come to the final slides now. So again, clear messaging. Again, this is from the National Memorial Arboretum. You might not have the opportunity, but think about, if you can't think about you can't spend a lot of money on branding, just make sure your signage is consistent at least, and you can potentially use templates that are available from the government and other health organisations, and that messaging is consistent all the way through. And also in keeping with your other signage, and it's visible and it's not too overwhelming as well. Just a little reminder in the background, accessible signage. So all of you think about this, but don't forget about accessible formats. Your signage needs to be suitable for all of your visitors. I know there might be a rush to kind of get on the printer and do a bit of laminating and get some signs up. Make sure that you are following some of the clear guidance. There's an awful lot available out there. This is some guidance taken from the government's inclusive communication work that's been done. Really simple, write in plain language, make it as concise as possible, designed to be as legible as possible, for example, using minimum 14-point text size. Just make sure that you're being really clear on your signage, and also, as we said, you may have to change the signage as you go through, making sure that all of it is available and readable by all of your visitors, because this is about the inclusivity of the experience, even with the COVID restrictions apply for all your visitors as it does for anybody else as well. So there's some really good guidance out there. So this is from the Disability Collaborative Network. They've got a website. Here's a link to some of their guidance from the Royal National Institute for the Blind and others. So if you want to go out there and get additional guidance, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this already. I just think, having seen a lot of examples of signage going up in response to coronavirus, it's one area I think has been a real failing, actually. There's been such a rush to get the signage up and working that this has been forgotten about, in spite of some fantastic work being done in the last decade to really improve signage for all users around sites. So just there's a little nudge here just to kind of think about this one and remember that. Communicating with staff, remember you're not alone, keep in close contact with partners, collaborate community, invites, talk to each other, keep the engagement going, understand what's happening. So you've seen that quote already, so I won't read that one. And with an entire 35 seconds to spare, that gets me to the end of the session. Again, I'm going to just, before I hand over to Libby, just say almost an apology that we try to cover so much content in such a short period of time. There's some fantastic resources out there. I'm hoping all of you took away a few pointers, some ideas, some sites to go and look at, some guidance that you weren't aware of. If nothing else, that you got some reassurance that there's a whole group of people here and across the sector who are in exactly the same boat as you are. If you've got questions, ask them, use forums, use social medias, get those out there. Also understand that your visitors are also quite understanding about this. Engage with them, get them on board in the process, and actually you can look at opportunities about building relationships with your visitors and other stakeholders. This could be a fantastic opportunity to do that. So look for the silver linings of the clouds. But thank you for your time. I hope it was useful. As I said, give us some feedback. Always pleased to hear it. Kind of good or bad, anything we can do better. And please do get in contact with me directly or via Elizabeth and any questions I haven't answered. And I'll be on for Q&A at the end if anybody's got me. So I'm going to hand over to Libby.
Right, thanks Ben for that. I'll just attempt to share my screen. Ooh. Right, can everybody see that? Yay, hurrah. Well, thanks very much, Ben. I'm very aware we're in the home straight now, and I'm sure everybody's tea is beckoning at some point soon. So I'll try and keep it to the point and hopefully reasonably interesting. I'm Libby Finney. I'm the Regional Collection Care Development Officer. Some of you have probably already met me before, but I'm responsible for providing collection care support for all the London regional museums. And as Ben said, things at the moment are changing constantly. So I think advice as to what we're going to do and how we do things will move with that. And as museums open and start experiencing what works and doesn't work, advice may change or alter a bit. But at the moment, the kind of information I'm going to be talking about over the next 40 minutes has been pulled from a whole raft of advisory documents, some of which are from the government and HSE. But regarding collection care and COVID, it's been a little bit harder. So a lot of the information that we use as conservators and collections care people has come also from Canada and America. I'm going to be giving a list of all the links that I mention in my talk to Elizabeth, and she'll be sending out those hyperlinks to all of you, so that when I'm mentioning something in the talk, you will be able to click on and get more information about that when they come out to you. And I've referenced them by the slide that I'm going to be talking to. I thought it was very interesting yesterday that nobody mentioned collection care as an issue they were worried about, or collections indeed. So hopefully behind all the black boxes with names on, somebody is still sitting there listening to this. And it was interesting earlier on, again, when Ben said, what were your main concerns? And quite a few people said cleaning, deep cleaning. But again, nothing was mentioned about collections. So, you know, do mention things in chat. And if you've got any queries, and I shall attempt to find where it is on my desktop because I can't find it at the moment, and deal with it. Interestingly enough, when COVID first started, the questions that I was being asked a lot for the first 2 or 3 weeks related to emergency planning. What shall I do if there's an emergency? Our team can't get called out. How can we deal with it? Then it all went quiet, and I actually caught up with my work backlog for the next couple of weeks. And then people started to get feedback or visit their sites periodically. And the big problem there were pests. So we've had quite a lot of increased notification of pest problems. And the past couple of weeks, it's mainly been, how do I deal with disinfecting things? So I'm really seeing a change in the sort of questions I'm being asked to answer as we move towards reopening. So the first thing really to look for is be prepared. Before you go back, start thinking about familiarising yourself with your current collection care policies and plans, what you're hoping to maintain currently, what advice there is out there and what the standards are. Because I think we've also been off for quite a long time, and it becomes quite difficult to get yourself back into that mindset and to feel confident about understanding what you're seeing and recognising whether you've got any collection care issues or not. So things like benchmarks in collection care, the English Heritage Pest posters, and the whole raft of online tools, all of which I've put in the links, might be a nice way to start, just to kind of get your toe back in the water and think about the collection care aspect of return. For some people at home who do have access to existing or past records for environmental monitoring and pests, now would be a really good time to go back through them, interpret them, familiarise yourself with them. So actually you've got a good idea of what you've dealt with in the past, and therefore what you might be expecting to face when you go back, and you'll be able to tell if there are any changes that might flag up problems that you could address. If you've not been going in, talk to any people who have been going in for building and collection checks and find out what's happening and talk to them and see if they have got any concerns. And work out a collection care plan of action for your return to work. And actually, Ben, I was thinking that your checklist that you gave everybody for homework, you could just add a box on the bottom about collections implications and then see how that fits in to the other issues that Ben already had put down in that box. Because there are some things that you may be thinking of doing or will have to do when you reopen that could potentially impact directly or indirectly on your collections that perhaps haven't been thought of at this point. If you want to restart or change settings on your building management systems, air conditioning or heating systems, are you able to do that safely? Will you need a company to come in and do that or service the equipment? And if that's happening, what are going to be the possible effects on your collections? You may have altered settings so that temperature and humidity have been changed for the period that you're closed. Now you're looking at reopening. You may need to look at changing that again. So have a think about what the knock-on effects might be on your collections. Finally, start thinking now about whether you need to order materials, equipment, or get companies in. Everybody's going to be looking for exactly the same sort of things, I think. So there might be long lead-in times for things like personal protective equipment and gloves and so on. So start thinking now about the implications of that. If you have data loggers that might need changing, do you have batteries for them? Have you got sufficient pest traps, because the ones you've had sadly might be full at this point and you might want some more when you go back. So just have a think about things that could make your life easier once you return to work and aren't going to hold you up when you get back. Ooh. Right. There are an inordinate amount of checklists available, and they are very helpful, but I think we've got them from the South East, South West and East Midlands Museum Development, the Association of Independent Museums and the Institute of Conservation. So there's a fair raft of checklists, some of which were drawn up to help you check things during lockdown, and some of which have been drawn up with a view to reopening, but they all contain very similar information and advice, and they are a really useful starting point to flag up the sort of things that you might want to think about. I think when we all get back to work, we're probably all going to want to rush in, and it's almost going to be quite overwhelming. You've got to, you know, catch up with everybody on what's happening, whole new ways of doing things. You're still worried about collections. Where do I start? And for me, I know personally, I do like a list because it enables me to focus on what I need to do in the order I need to do it. And it kind of cuts out the panic and that initial not really thinking about what I should be doing first and then ending up doing something 10 times over. So I put links to all of those plans in the list that will be going out to you. So hopefully you will be able to see those. But I would say what you should do is devise a plan of action that's suited to your museum, your collection requirements and your circumstances. So have a think about what you might want to do first based on your situation. I think you should be very realistic about what you can achieve, what the main risks to your collections are, and then think about planning and prioritising. It is going to be very tempting to go back and rush at everything in a way like a bullet a gate and try and get everything done because you're worried about so many different things. And I know that I've had people emailing me with so many worries and concerns that actually are probably not half as worrisome as they think they are. And the best thing is just to have a list and be realistic. Allow yourself breaks, allow yourself time to get back into the method and modes of work and feel confident about what you're doing. Take breaks, ask for help if necessary, and be flexible so that if you do come across something that's happened and you might need to adapt your list and move things around a bit, you're able to do that. Think about how what you're planning to do is going to fit into the new government guidelines on COVID working and your institutional plans for reopening and any health and safety issues, because it's not going to be standalone. You need to think about that. And a lot of what you're doing is going to be exactly the same as you're doing now regarding collections care. It's not going to have changed massively. Think about if you need help to undertake the checks. Do you have a backlog when you go in? Are you going to be having to download all your data loggers, check all your pest traps, walk around all the stores? If so, can you ask for help? Can you delegate that to somebody? And then think about giving them the training and support that enables them to do that. And finally, record and document any findings, including any images, because ultimately that might help you identify problems. And also, if you can't deal with everything now, you've actually got the information available to do something about it, you know, further ahead. And also, if you have got any damage or there has been any problems since you've been closed, things like that are useful if you do need to make an insurance claim. When you first get back, actually, I think it is going to be quite overwhelming. And I think your list hopefully will be something that will guide you through this. Ultimately, it's health and safety first for people. So again, think about the government guidelines, think about what you're doing, a personal protective equipment, PPE that you might need, and the new hygiene rules and regulations. But again, if you're working to good practice with collection care, you're going to be doing a lot of this as a matter of course anyway. The first thing I would start with, probably after I've gone in and had a cup of coffee and a couple of biscuits or three, would be a buildings and collections walk around. So prioritise the vulnerable areas or the vulnerable collections and the known trouble spots. Start from the outside and work in. So have the gutters been blocked? Have any roof tiles been dislodged in those high winds last week? Are the drains being blocked because nobody's done site maintenance for 3 months? You know, all that kind of stuff. Then walk round on the inside and look for such things as water damage, water ingress, and mould. If it smells damp and musty, is it because you have a problem or because the doors have just been closed for the last 3 months and that when you've opened them and ventilated it, it'll be fine? So don't panic if it does smell really bad. Try and find the source of the smell if it's damp or musty. Check behind shelves or under objects. Check things that are up against external walls, for example, or near drains or pipes which might leak, and areas that you know that you have problems with. Mold can be very dangerous to health, so if you do find it, you should wear barrier gloves, aprons, and a suitable dust mask, which should be an FFP2 or 3. If you do find water or leaks, see if you can turn off any water if it's coming from a mains or a pipe. Blot up any excess, ventilate the rooms, don't turn the heating up, just ventilate the rooms and lift everything off the floor first. Pests, as I've said, pests are an increasing problem. Silverfish, moths, and we've had one death watch beetle raise its ugly head in the last week, but they are definitely on the move. You have been closed for some time and pests like nothing more than dark, fairly warm, uninterrupted areas. So they're probably going to have been having a field day if you have a small problem to begin with. You may also not think you have a rodent problem. However, with being closed and people having potentially left the building quite quickly, your shop may have chocolates and sweets in it, your staff may have left things in their drawers or on their desks, you may also have rodent problems. So familiarise yourself with what rodents and debris looks like. The Institute of Conservation's Waking Up Collections, which will be in your links, has got a nice picture of rat poo and mouse poo matched against grains of rice, so you get a feeling of the size. So if you're having rice for your tea after this, I apologise, but it's quite a useful document. You need to kind of learn what you see and read the signs, so you can't ignore pest damage by not understanding what it looks like. Again, check vulnerable collections which you know are prone to things such as textiles or taxidermy, open displays, particularly things where you've got carpet or furniture in. Check your staff areas and your cafes, your offices. If you find anything with pests, try and identify them. Seal anything that might be affected by them with polythene if possible, because at least that contains the problem. Seek advice from a conservator about how to treat that. And then if you do vacuum any debris up, empty your vacuum cleaner bag outside the museum into a bin. Don't bring it back into the museum until you've emptied it. Your environmental conditions probably will have changed a bit. You haven't had anyone in your museum for a while, maybe. Once you start opening up, staff come in, you're changing the settings on all of your equipment to reflect opening hours. You might see quite a change in those. So check your data loggers as soon as you can. Use your monitoring equipment. You really can't accurately tell just by standing in a room what the temperature and humidity is. You will need to go back and check your monitoring equipment. And that's where, if you've got previous records and you've had a chance to look at them, that really helps, because you can see what was happening this time last year and it might flag up if you've got any problems. Dust. I know one of our conservators had been into our galleries a few weeks ago and said he's never seen it so clean. So obviously for us, the visitors are a massive source of dust ingress. But for some museums, dust actually might be worse because there's a much lower cleaning regime. Dust actually can be quite damaging to objects. It can scratch surfaces. Obviously, it's not nice to look at visually for visitors. The other thing is, in reasonable humidities, the moisture in the air can combine with the dust and it can make it quite a sticky, hard substance that literally sticks to your objects. So if you are cleaning dust off your collection objects, clean it carefully like you normally would, using brushes or suitable cloths or vacuum cleaners, but just be very aware that sometimes the dust might not come off as easily as it used to do. So you might need to think about different methods of cleaning. Check for physical damage when you walk around, anything that might have fallen over, dropped off a wall. If you've got heavy traffic that moves past your museum, items might have crept towards the edge of shelves, so just keep an eye out for that. It's very important to check your salvage kits are still intact. If people have potentially perhaps removed boxes of nitrile gloves from them because they're using them for PPE, for cleaning or visitors, you might want to think about replacing those. If you've had some call out issues and used some of your kits while the museum's been closed, again, look at stocking them up. You may potentially have new people on your call out list because with coronavirus, some people are shielding or self-isolating. The travel restrictions have meant some people can't come in. If you have new people and they're in the museum and they can go and have a look at the kits, show them where the kits are and familiarise themselves with what's in them and how they will use them in case of an emergency. And finally, have a look at your items that you might have on loan from somewhere else. Check that you're still meeting the loan agreement or government indemnity requirements. And that again might be an issue if you've had pests or potentially your environmental readings aren't very good. Those are only just some of the things to check. The lists I mentioned earlier on are much fuller and will give you more details of the kind of things to look at. But hopefully that's not too many things on your first day back. I think one of the things that's going to be quite difficult on returning is lots of things will have changed. And actually some of the things that will have changed, people won't really necessarily think about the possible implication for collections. So are you going to be looking at new routes through the museum? And I think yesterday Ben was showing us museums where people walked down one side, came back down another side, they go in through one door. You may be opening new doors for people to come in and out of the building. The thing about that is it's going to potentially impact on your collections. So have a think about how that might happen. Are there fragile objects closer to a route now? Does the route go close to things on open display where they weren't on open display before? Are you going to have far more footfall on bouncy floorboards, so objects in cases might move towards the edge of shelves? So have a think about how that may impact on the collection. And I think Stephen from the Museum of London said something great yesterday when he said they've done a walk around of their new routes. They're looking at it from a visitor point of view, but you could still walk the new routes, but look at it from an object point of view. If you've not got a cloakroom and people are now walking around with big wet coats or potentially backpacks or large bags, is that an implication for your objects if they're close to a route that people are walking through? So perhaps you might want to try walking the routes, you know, as a visitor would, with the same sort of things a visitor might have. You could look at using barriers or signage or moving cases so that it makes it slightly harder to get to objects directly. But you might need to think of doing things slightly differently to try and stop an impact of route changes on your objects. Ben mentioned as well increase in ventilation, and I think somebody popped up a link to CIBSE, and I've got links to CIBSE and also the RAVA, the Federation of European Heating, Ventilation and Air Conditioning Association, because it's not my area. I have no knowledge of why, how to do this or what's going to be suggested. But the implication is that potentially ventilation in museums may be increased when they reopen. So how are you going to do that? Are you increasing the amount of fresh air coming through your aircon system? If that happens, is that going to impact on temperature and humidity in your gallery spaces? Are you going to have to open doors and external windows? If so, is that going to again affect temperature and humidity? Is it going to impact on dust and dirt coming in, which then might impact on your cleaning regimes? So I think there are quite a lot of things to think about regarding that. And again, new routes, if people are going around in a different direction, may mean the way you clean areas at the moment might have to change because the dirt and dust might be deposited differently because people are using your building differently. Ben also mentioned hand sanitizers. Now, as I said, the information that I'm taking this from comes right across the conservation spectrum from places all over the world. And the only reason I'm mentioning this at the moment, whether alcohol-based hand sanitizers are close to collections, is because there was a very brief article by the American Library of Congress that found that alcohol-based hand sanitizers caused more yellowing of paper and books rather than water-based hand sanitizers. However, the article is in the links I'm sending you. They did apply the hand sanitizer directly to the paper in order to do the tests. But I was wondering if potentially, if you have hand sanitizers close to objects that are on open display or things that are quite fragile, if somebody has applied it and it's still wet on their hands and they touch the object, there could possibly be some interaction between the hand sanitizer and the object. I don't know for absolutely sure. All I've got is that one single article on it, but it may be something just to bear in mind when you're citing your hand sanitizers or thinking about where they are in relation to your open display objects. That may change as more work is done to look at the impacts of that. So overall, really, think about mitigating any issues from changes that you're now putting in place in the museum, most of which you probably don't think impact directly on collections, but ostensibly they could do. So if you think about them now and try and mitigate those, it's less work in the long run. I think one of the things now I'm being asked about the most is cleaning, and I think Ben touched on this earlier on, and also most of what Ben said I'm still going to cover in almost exactly the same way. And a lot of it, again, is still the same as what you will have been doing pre-COVID. So you distinguish between your collection objects and general non-object areas or cleaning. Because disinfectants and general cleaning agents are not recommended for use on collections, as I'm sure you know, and as I'm sure you're already not using. So you need to think very carefully when you're setting your cleaning regimes up, what areas you're cleaning for hygiene and what areas you're cleaning for hygiene as collection areas. I've had 4 museums in the past 3 weeks get in touch with me about disinfecting the entire museum, including galleries and public areas. And this is a really tough one. All I can say at the moment, and the links to this are in the documents I'm sending you, that fogging or electrostatic wholesale disinfection of collections is not recommended. So it doesn't say not the whole museum, it's just collections. The Canadian Conservation Institute have done work on this, and there's a really useful video and guidance from the National Centre for Preservation and Technology in the US, again explaining why this might not be a good idea. So I think if you're asked to disinfect areas where there are collections, you need to think, why should I do that? Why do I need to disinfect all of the collections? Are there other ways of managing the risk of contamination from collections without disinfecting them? Ordinarily, would you be happy to spray your collections with a disinfectant? Probably not. So think very carefully about that. You should also ask anybody who's going to be supplying you with disinfectants or cleaning agents, or your cleaning company who's recommending this, you should ask them for the material safety data sheet that relates to it. It's the MSDS, and it should detail the chemical constituents so you understand what's in the thing that they're spraying. Because they'll probably say, it's not dangerous, we don't need to do anything. But actually what you need to understand are what chemical constituents are in it. Not just from a health and safety risk to you, but even if you don't need to do a cost assessment for it, you still want to know what's in it from a materials that might interact adversely with your collection's point of view. You should also ask them for their risk assessments and method statements. So how are they going to apply it? What are they going to do? So I think the advice is, generally, fogging or wholesale, electrostatic wholesale disinfectant of collections areas is not currently recommended for the reasons I've said, but you need to really think about why you're going to do it, and are there other ways that you could do it in a way that won't put your collections at risk. But ultimately, the choice is going to be yours based on your risk assessment of the situation. As Ben has given you shots of the screen, there is government advice on cleaning in non-healthcare settings, which is applicable to all your non-collection surfaces and areas. And again, there's a link to that. But while you are doing that, you should think about the application methods. So if you are spraying areas with disinfectant in a gallery space where you have objects on open display, you might want to think about not spraying the area itself, but spraying something you can then wipe over the area. So spraying onto a cloth and using the cloth near the objects. Just have a think about the application methods and techniques that are being used, or the chemicals that are actually going to be used in a collection space, even if they're not being used on the objects. And again, that will come down to understanding what's in them, getting the safety data sheets, and having a clear think about what you might be doing. If you are going to be using staff and volunteers to clean where they haven't cleaned before, and that did seem to be the way that things were going, looking at the chat from the last session, then I think you really do need to make sure that they are familiar with the cleaning products. You should again check through the material safety data sheet what is in them, make sure people are not allergic to anything that's in them. You may need to do a COSH assessment, control of substances hazardous to health, for some materials, so you need to check whether you need to do that. And then you'll need to check how to use the actual materials in dilution and application, and make sure that anybody who's then going to be using that is clearly trained and they know what they're doing and how to apply it, and more sort of carefully in collections areas, what they can apply it to and what they shouldn't apply it to. You should also really, it'd be great to think that suitable equipment and materials are available and that they're kept separate. So non-collection cleaning equipment and materials, if they're kept separate from the collections cleaning materials, will make it very much easier for you to not inadvertently use cloths that have been used on something else, or not use materials that are not recommended for collections. When you've looked at the general cleaning, the tough one is your objects themselves. And this is a difficult one. I think there's kind of three ways of looking at this. Firstly, and the best way, is avoid the need to clean collection objects at all. So ask yourself, why are we cleaning them? And can we avoid the need to clean them by removing the fact that people can touch them? So think about signage. One museum recently said to me they were going to change the signs from "please don't touch" to "we cannot disinfect these objects, so please try not to touch them." So giving people the advice of why they shouldn't touch and linking it back to the contamination. I think at the current time people might find it easier to understand that. Think about using barriers, not necessarily in your face, big barriers, but positioning objects, if you've already got barriers, moving them back a little bit, changing routes if it's possible so people can't get quite as close to open display things. If you do need to close galleries because you've got just tons of things on open display, that might be something to think about. Moving objects is a kind of a last resort because they're almost just as much at risk from being moved as being touched and cleaned. But generally, I think my understanding is that probably catching COVID from contaminated objects is lower than person-to-person contact or high traffic areas. So you will have to carry risk assessments out where your collections are concerned and work out what the risks will be to people from contaminated objects, and then decide, make your decisions based on that really. But firstly, try and avoid the need to clean them at all. If you're working with staff in staff areas or stores, again, and we'll come on to moving collections on the next slide, try and avoid actually moving them and think about different ways that you can handle and deal with objects rather than touching them. If you do have to touch objects, the next best thing to do, if possible, is quarantine them. The government website says after 72 hours, the risk from the virus is significantly reduced. But you will see if you read the articles I've given you the links to from the US and Canada, they talk about as much as 9 or even 12 days for quarantining items, because the virus can apparently stay active for different periods of time depending on what the material of the object is, and also depending on temperature and humidity. So it's a minimum of 72 hours. Research is still being undertaken to get far more information about that, and I'm sure that might change as we move along. If you are handling things, try and use gloves to do that. And the thing about gloves is remove the gloves carefully, because a study of the NHS showed that nurses were contaminating themselves when they took their gloves off because they were then touching their bare hands whilst removing the gloves. So there's a very useful poster on the Health and Safety Executive website about how to remove your nitrile gloves safely without touching your skin. And I posted that through in the links. Ben, I think, already covered the disposal of PPE, so that's been covered. If you don't have any gloves available, because they may be hard to get hold of, it's the usual good practice: wash and dry your hands thoroughly just before touching the object, and then wash and dry your hands thoroughly after touching the object. If it's possible to move objects in crates or boxes that are more easily cleaned, then that might be better, because if you can wipe a plastic crate down with a disinfectant, then that's better than trying to handle or clean the object. I think forward planning is probably key to this. The number of times we all move things 10 times because we've not done something properly, or we've forgotten to look at it, or we've put it down somewhere and then wanted to move it somewhere else. Think carefully when you have to move something and plan ahead. That reduces the need to actually move things. Remind people to keep touching to a minimum if possible. And if objects have been touched and you do need to quarantine things, think about creating an area of a shelf or in a store or crates where those items can be put, and they can be clearly labelled with the fact that they're in quarantine, and you can have a date on there after which they're safe to handle and move again. I think the last resort is to actually clean an object. And if you do that outside of the way you normally clean them, seek advice from a conservator if possible, and document any cleaning. Because the more an object is cleaned, the more likely damage is going to be made to it from inappropriate materials or equipment, and also just wearing away the surface. So weigh up the risk of damage to the object against the risk of contamination from the object, and think if there's another way you can do it other than clean it. However, in the list of links I've sent you is some quite useful advice from Historic England and the National Centre for Preservation and Technology on how to clean a variety of materials safely if you have to. So finally, we're looking at moving objects, moving collections. Some museums have been doing this all the way through lockdown. And it's not going to stop, because that's one of the things that we do. But again, it comes back to, can you avoid moving objects? Is there an alternative way of doing something rather than moving it? If you can't and you have to move things, plan, and plan again, so you can safely move them with the minimum of handling. If you're moving collections, follow good handling and manual handling practice. And I think Ben said this as well. Just because we're now dealing with some things differently, it doesn't mean the way we did things before has gone out of the window. So we always did risk assessments and good manual handling before. That continues. You need to bear that in mind, and you may well need to update and adapt your risk assessments to reflect current practice, but you shouldn't just ditch good practice in manual handling for safe distancing. It's all about balancing the risks. So always do a risk assessment first and follow the guidelines, the government guidelines about how you can do that. I've sent you a link to the Health and Safety Executive, who actually have some really sensible and quite straightforward information and advice about risk assessments. I think that you might need extra equipment for safe distancing. Maybe jobs that 2 people did before, you could buy something like a trolley and people can move things on their own. So you might want to think about buying in or budgeting for new equipment that might help people move things safely. If you can't move larger objects when safe distancing, then do follow the government guidelines about what to do, which is quite difficult because I think it is going to come in with PPE, but their website isn't clear on that. Again, undertake your risk assessment to reflect that. I think if you're now going to be using personal protective equipment and other equipment that staff have not been used to using and they're not familiar with, you need to ensure that they do know how to use it and that they can use it safely and they feel confident to do so. Don't just assume people will be able to pick something up and get on with it. So think about any extra time taken to train and support them while they get used to using it. Communicate clearly regarding planned movement. So we avoid the old Chuckle Brothers, to me, to you, to me, to you. We actually know what's going on and everybody's a part of the team that knows how to handle everything. I think if you're wearing face masks, it will make communication a little more difficult because it can be hard to hear what people are saying and you can't see what they're saying. So make sure that you're clear before you start about hand signals or what's going to happen or what you're going to do. Don't compromise safe manual handling. And again, I'll just refer you back to risk assessment and good planning. Make sure that's built in. Quarantine items after moving where possible for at least 72 hours. The large museum in London has just moved everything from one of their sites outside London to a store in London, and they've used one team to do that. Everything's left in the store, clearly labelled as being quarantined, and then after the 72 hours, another team comes in that works in the new store and moves all those objects where they should be going. So have a think about how you can do that if you're moving. Build that into your planning and time. Finally, if external firms are involved, then they should be able to provide you with risk assessments and method statements. So check that you're clear what they're saying they're going to do, that you're happy that they're meeting the guidelines they're required to meet, and they also fit in with what you require from them, and make sure your staff are aware of what they're going to be doing and that they can work safely with them. I'll leave the summary sheet up, but I'm just going to say there is a lot of changing advice and information. I will tweet about it on my Twitter account, and I will try and ensure that the museum development team has sent any updates for their weekly newsletter. Things are continually changing, and as Ben said, you're already doing a lot of this now. There's like an extra layer of things on top, or maybe things you have to tweak to do, but don't ditch all the old ways of doing things and assume you have to do everything in a different way. Always assess what you're doing and think about your risk assessments, and make sure that your staff are kept in the loop with any changes and that you have appropriately assessed what's needed in order to safely carry on with your work. If you're worried about any collection care issues, particularly when you get back and you start finding things you wish you didn't have problems with, and you do need any more in-depth, either email me, or if you would like a Zoom meeting, I've had several more kind of in-depth Zoom meetings about problems that staff have been worried about in museums, and I'm very happy to do that as well. My details are on the contact page. So I don't know if anything came up in chat, because I don't have the chat bar at all on my screen, I'm afraid. So
Libby, I can read some out. Someone's worried about COVID cleaning having cleared away evidence of pests.
I think that is an issue, but if the evidence has gone, it's gone. Don't worry about that. Go around and do your initial checks and look for the vulnerable areas first. I think the other thing you could do is also advise your staff and volunteers of what sort of evidence pests leave behind. So show them what, rat and mouse droppings look like. Show them what little bits of objects on the floor might be a problem because of. Have a think about any beetles you see on windowsills. I'm really sorry to say it's been a warm spring, and May is when a lot of insects really do start getting active. So it wouldn't surprise me when you get back if you do find that you have pest problems. Don't panic. Look at the links, follow the advice. You can always get in touch with me, but don't worry. If the COVID cleaning's cleaned any evidence away, if you've got pests, I'm afraid it will come back and you will see it again. But follow your pest traps and just follow the advice that's out there. Don't panic too much.
Thanks, Libby. And Ben has asked, is there a shortage of PPE for collection care teams? Because many gave away their stockpiles to support healthcare in the early days of lockdown.
Yes, we gave thousands of things away to the London Ambulance Service in week 3. We did leave a couple of boxes in each of our stores, but yeah, we are going to be having to start buying in as well. So that's one of the things we're looking at now. I think the firms are out there and they will be able to provide them, but look around and see if you can find things that are suitable for you. If all else fails, then you can't do tasks without the suitable PPE. Then you can't do them. I think you follow those risk assessments.
Well, thank you, Libby. I think we've got a few minutes left. Does anyone have any last few questions for Ben or Libby? Libby, you can stop sharing your screen actually, and then. Have you done it?
I've got nothing on my computer.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you. That's it.